Hey guys, this is your host Nitin Binhani and a very warm welcome to my startup podcast channel Desire Audio, where we share real stories with real learnings. As of March 2022, there are over 1,000 unicorns around the world. So for some time, I had been pretty curious to understand how really VCs dig out or put their bets on such unicorns at quite an early stage. So in today's podcast, I invited Ashish Kumar, a partner at Fundamentum Partnership, a growth-based VC fund based out of India, to share his insights on how does a VC source a unicorn deal at the early stage. To share about his role, Ashish was instrumental in investing PharmEasy back in 2018 when it was hardly known, and today PharmEasy is a recognized healthcare platform in India that was last valued at $5.6 billion. So let's welcome our today's special guest. Hey Ashish, welcome to Desire Audio. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Nitin. I'm pretty excited to be here as well and talk to you and talk to your audience.
Let's start with, as a part of a VC firm, what got you interested in the healthcare sector?
Nitin, I believe every sector in India will go through digitization, and the largest companies in these spaces will create massive values by digitizing multiple adjacent profit pools in that ecosystem. So when you think about healthcare, we kind of look at this into three large sectors, OPD, IPD, and wellness. And we believe that there will be a large company that will be created in each of these areas because of their immense market size. And if you look at all OPD, IPD, and wellness, each one of them are multi-billion dollar market size opportunities.
Yeah.
The second is the ease and value of digitization in these spaces and the quality of entrepreneurs that I am seeing who are trying to solve this problem. So when you look at all three, so PharmEasy is our investment in the OPD space. We have also made one in the IPD space that we will announce soon.
Now, you had assessed several players in the pharma sector. What were the three key factors that stood out for PharmEasy?
Yeah, interesting question. I would say the first will be the completeness of the team.
Okay.
So there are 5 founders. So Siddharth, who is the CEO of the business, he is the transformational leader. Tharmal and Harsh are the operational muscle of the business, and Dhaval and Hardik are the integrator of the business. So we haven't seen too many teams which are as complete as what we saw in PharmEasy. So that's one.
Okay.
Second is that these PharmEasy also demonstrated very right early choices by focusing on the two things, I would say. One is the gross margin, where, in this industry, there are various pharma associations who had some say, and which does have an impact on how gross margins play out. But the team actually focused on the gross margins.
Yeah.
And the second one on this is they also built their own last mile logistics that helped them with higher customer satisfaction scores. So when we looked at other players, the logistics was pretty much outsourced to the existing third-party logistics player in the country, whereas pharma, which also requires certain medicines to be transferred in a temperature controlled environment, would require your own last mile logistics, and that's the second thing that PharmEasy had done well. And the third, I would say, is that PharmEasy also focused on very long-term value creation by thinking of the space as an ecosystem, where eventually, while they started with pharma, but they knew that ultimately this is the business. After some time, we'll also have to look at diagnostics, B2B supplies, and these will be all integrated rather than them remaining just the pharma consumer supplies.
And besides the team, what other factors drove you to commit to PharmEasy?
Yeah, so in general, when you look at, let's say, the pharma space, the fact that it was a large market, easy to digitize, those were the two themes. But when you look at, let's say, PharmEasy in general, other than the fact that the founders were outstanding entrepreneurs, I think the entire team, not only founders, but the next level management team, they actually demonstrated very strong domain knowledge. And many of them actually had some previous backgrounds in the healthcare sector, either professionally or through their family. People were doctors. In fact, one of the co-founders is a doctor himself in the company, right? So, and that was very nicely captured in the entire management team of, let's say, 10, 12 people, right? Not only the founders. The second, which is again a very organizational muscle, was this deep empathy for customer pain. Right? Yeah. Healthcare is a sector where it has to be more than business, right? And you have to kind of empathize with the customer a little more than any other business, and it requires a very different type of thinking and empathy. So that was the second thing that I would say. And And the third is that in general, these guys were great business people. I have seen a lot of people starting from in the technology background. They're great at product, they're great at engineering, and they may also be good at domain. But a lot of times they may not be as good at thinking through the business from a pure business building skills. And I thought it was by far, one of the better organized company, even at an earlier stage. When we invested in PharmEasy, of course, they were very, very small at that point of time.
So in general, what makes a team shine over others in a particular sector?
Yeah, so I think now I have a privilege of meeting multiple entrepreneurs, and I've also seen which are the companies which become successful. And I will say, Nitin, that there may be 3 to 4 characteristics of the team that pretty much bubbles up as a common theme across these companies. Number one is obsession for customer satisfaction, right? So how obsessed are you with the value proposition and whether customer is happy there or not, and not only happy, but he has to be probably 10 times more happier than the other alternative that he or she has. Number 2 is that there is a very deep desire to be market leader. India is a market where it rewards the leader significantly more than even the second player. That's the second common characteristic that I've seen in entrepreneurs, that they have a very deep desire to be the market leader. They're just not happy with being the number 2. Third, I would say, is the first principle thinking. So most of these businesses are being built for the first time, and they don't have too many parallels that they can take examples from. So you can't just copy anybody else's execution. You have to kind of think about that from a very first principle basis. So that's the third piece. And I would say the last one will be very high integrity. These could be very large businesses. These businesses will not make money for quite some time. They will attract a lot of capital. So high integrity is the fourth and one of the most important pillar in all of this.
Coming back to PharmEasy, you had tweeted some time back about channel relationships, margins, and supply chain as the key differentiator or even more for PharmEasy. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I will say multiple things, which is of course part of the tweet, but if I were to really maybe bubble up 2 large difference, was number one is that if you look at the structure of this industry, the entire distribution plus retailer margin has been constant throughout the last many years. It usually is around 30% or so, right? And the reason, irrespective of whether you are a strong pharma company or a new and upcoming pharma company, and similarly whether you're a new distributor or an existing distributor, everyone has a very similar gross margin, and that is because there is an association which ensures a little bit of parity, right? In a way, it is not very standard free market behavior. In a free market, anybody new would, if there is a new pharma company, they would actually give a little more margins to get people to start using their medicine. So it does not happen here. But if you are creating a company, you will have to solve this problem. You will have to say that, hey, can I make, instead of 30% gross margin, can I make higher gross margin? And that would only happen when you start understanding pharma companies a lot more better. So their entire relations with these pharma companies actually help them do that. So they understood that while in many medicines that margins will continue to remain what it is, but in certain scenarios the margins could be very different. And that's exactly one difference that we saw, Nitin, when we invested. That when we looked at like 4, 5, 6 companies, there is a stark difference between what gross margin PharmEasy was showing vis-a-vis any other company. So that I would say was the great insight that the company had, and that ultimately became to be differentiator, because in an e-commerce model, the cost for most companies would be very similar. It is the margin that where you could differentiate, right? And the reason the cost is similar because e-commerce is a relatively mature industry in India, and you can't differentiate on cost. You have to differentiate on margin. The second is this: they had an in-house logistics team, last mile logistics team, which is called Swifto. And the reason it is important is that medicines, there are certain medicines, let's say insulin injection, right? It needs to be transported in a temperature controlled environment. And when you are ordering, God forbid, if somebody has a has a condition where they need insulin injection and they also need certain other medicines, it has to be delivered to them together. It is not that you could say that give me 3 medicines today and give me 4 medicines tomorrow. It does not work like that. There is a concept of entire prescription fill rate. And that would only be possible when you have a logistics team which is owned, controlled by you, and third party players until then, it wasn't a very large use case. So they were not solving for it. So you had to solve for it yourself. And PharmEasy actually had this foresight that they created this, which ultimately helped out in the customer satisfaction. And in a consumer internet company, once you have the customer satisfaction, naturally you will keep getting a better word of mouth, and that will ultimately yield into higher market share for you.
So this might be a cliche question. Did you ever envisage that PharmEasy would turn out to be a unicorn someday?
Yeah, so I always thought that they would be a unicorn, but I definitely was very pleasantly surprised that it took them so little time. I think they didn't even take them 4 years. It actually took them, I think, somewhere between 2.5 to 3 years, if my memory serves me right. So I definitely was very pleasantly surprised, and that's today's India, Nathan, right? The entrepreneurs are like far more aggressive, confident, and sometimes it is very educational, right? It also helps us as the investment team capacity kind of understand and benchmark our next set of entrepreneurs with what we have learned in the previous portfolio company.
From the founder's perspective, what should they really focus on at the early stage in order to become a leader in any sector?
I think writing is pretty much clear for everyone that, as a startup, what you have to do is that you have to do one job very, very well rather than, being average in 10. So it's very tempting when you are in an early stage, right? What will happen is that you will start with a problem. You will get some success initially, and then there will be a roadblock. The moment there is a roadblock, it's very tempting to see that while you are doing one experiment, you are actually doing multiple experiments, 2 or 3 experiments. And it may be very tempting to kind of look at an index on an experiment which may not be as strategic important to you, but you may just get little more success there. So it's important to choose to very, very narrowly define your market in the early days. And this choice is very important. And in the early stage, when you have less access to capital, you should not be doing that. So I would say that stay focused and spend time with the consumers on what is their biggest pain point, right? When you ask people will tell you 3 pain points, but when you ask enough number of people and ask that in an intelligent manner, you will naturally see that one problem is going to come a lot more number of times as compared to anybody else. And you just kind of solve for it, and that is how the brands get created. You say that, hey, I do this job and I do this job better than anybody else.
Finally, can you tell us about Fundamentum Partnership and what's your investment thesis?
Yeah, so we are what we call as an early growth stage investor, and we typically invest anywhere between $10 to $20 million in a single round of a company, and the companies could be raising anywhere between $20 to $50 million at that point of time, out of which we typically write half of this, and the rest half is usually because taken by their existing investors. So that's how we have done. We're building a pretty concentrated portfolio, and we also want to spend time with the company, as much time with the company post our investment as we have spent time before the investment, and that is why all our team members in the investment team have been ex-entrepreneurs at some point of time. Right? We feel that any entrepreneur who has anybody who has built businesses has a slightly better empathy and understanding of what does it take to kind of build businesses. So that's what we have done. We kind of invest in like Indian companies, whether they could be consumer tech or they could be enterprise software.
So with this, we have reached at the end of this podcast. Ashish, thank you so much for sharing great insights with us. It was really a pleasure to have you on Jazar Audio.
Thank you, Nitin. The pleasure is all mine. I enjoyed this conversation.
Are you a founder of an early stage startup and looking to raise funding? Get your startup investor ready before even you start pitching to your prospective investors. For know-how, please visit www.jazaro.in. That is www.jasaro.in.
Lastly, I want to thank all the listeners who took their valuable time to listen to this podcast. Keep rocking, be safe, and don't forget to share.